Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Carsey Policy Hour. I'm your host, Melinda Negron-Gonzalez, and this morning we have a fascinating conversation about a very important but often overlooked part of New Hampshire's early childhood education landscape, and that is public school affiliated preschool programs. So while New Hampshire doesn't currently offer state-funded universal preschool, school districts across the state have developed a wide range of local preschool models to serve young children and families. And so our presentation this morning examines what those programs look like, who they serve, how they're funded, and what they may reveal about the broader challenges and opportunities in the state's early care and education system. And by mapping this landscape, today's discussion really helps us better understand how public schools fit into New Hampshire's evolving approach to early learning, childcare, and to educational access. So I'm excited to learn more. But before we dive into today's discussion, I just have to remind you of a few things. The Carsey School of Public Policy is independent and nonpartisan. We are here to facilitate the free flow of ideas this morning, and the views expressed here today or at the Carsey Policy Hour in general don't necessarily reflect those of the Carsey School or any of our partners. And speaking of partners, I'd like to take a moment to thank our series partners: the New Hampshire Municipal Association, New Hampshire's Bureau of Education and Training, the New England Sustainability Network, and the New Hampshire Association of Counties. By the way, the Carsey School of Public Policy houses 4 research centers. And our speaker this morning is in our Center for Social Policy. And all of our policy briefs are on our website. Today's presentation will be on the Carsey Policy Hour website, along with the slides. And you can find the recordings of previous Carsey Policy Hour sessions on the website too. Also on our website, you can check out our 4 master's programs that are offered online and in person. So do check out our website for more info and for the recording of today's session, which should be there in about a day or so. Following today's discussion, the presentation will open the floor for questions and for comments. But do feel free to submit your comments and questions during the discussion, and you'll find the chat button on the center left of your Teams screen. The chat is open. It's visible to everybody, so we do ask that your comments remain respectful and constructive. And also, please do identify yourself when you pose a question or offer a remark. Thank you. So I have the great pleasure of introducing one of my colleagues at the Carsey School, Tyrus Parker, soon to be Dr. Tyrus Parker on Friday. Joined the Carsey School in 2024 as a research scientist for the Center for Social Policy in Practice. He's a sociologist and demographer by trade, and his graduate research has revolved around changing fertility rates across the U.S. and examining how the country is becoming more diverse in different ways. And as you know, this morning he's going to talk about the preschool landscape in New Hampshire. So I am very pleased to welcome Tyrus. Thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you for the introduction, Melinda. As she said, my name is Tyrus Parker, and my presentation today is titled New Hampshire Schools Offer Preschool, Exploring New Hampshire's Preschool Landscape. And before I begin, I just want to note that this work is supported by the Couch Family Foundation, but also builds upon work that was previously supported by the Preschool Development Grant. So to start my presentation, I just want to talk about what are these public school affiliated preschool programs and how we're defining them. So these programs are provided by a local school district that enrolls mostly 3- and 4-year-old children. And these programs are typically located in elementary schools or sometimes in a high school which would normally be part of a career and technical education program or at a standalone site. So basically, a school affiliated location is one that serves 3 and 4-year-old children outside of that traditional elementary school age range. And also important to note before I get more into this study and what we found is that schools must serve children with an individualized education program, which I'll call an IEP from this point forward. So schools are required to provide a free, appropriate public education to preschool age children with an IEP. And public school affiliated preschool programs are one of the several ways that schools can serve these children. And the schools are also required to serve children in a least restrictive environment. So schools try to serve 50% children with IEPs and 50% children without an IEP. And so why should we look at these New Hampshire school affiliated preschools, and why do this study about all of these programs in the state? So I just want to outline a couple of reasons that we're trying to understand these programs. The first being that not much is known about these programs. New Hampshire school affiliated preschool programs are not typically funded by the state, so the New Hampshire Education Department collects limited information on preschool program operations. And because of that, these programs can look different across the schools, as we'll get into later in the presentation. And then this is typically an unmeasured element of the early education ecosystem. So the New Hampshire childcare sector, we don't have enough slots for our children, so public preschool programs should be part of a multi-strand solution for this. But because New Hampshire does not have state-funded preschool programs, the local school districts make independent decisions about how and whether to operate their preschool classrooms. And since these decisions are left up to the schools, we need to capture the ways in which they're creatively funding and operating these programs. So to detail the research approach that we did for this study, this is our second year of data collection, and all of the data I report on will largely be from that second year, but we are currently doing our third year of data collection. In the spring of 2025, we contacted 264 potential preschool program locations, and we define that as all public schools registered with the New Hampshire Education Department as serving preschool, kindergarten, or first grade. And so we tried really hard to make sure we got data from all schools identified this way in the state, and we got responses from 262 of 264 potential locations. And for the 2 missing locations that we had last year, we did have data from the 2023-2024 school year, so we used that instead. As we tried to contact the schools, we started by emailing Qualtrics surveys to key administrative people within the schools, and we got a lot of responses that way. And for schools that didn't respond, we followed up by phone. So once the schools got the surveys, what were they asked to do? First, they indicated whether they operated a preschool program. And then locations that did have a program completed a short survey. The questions covered in this survey were both going over program offerings and program implementation. And I'm going to cover several areas of the survey in this presentation. So information from the survey that will be covered here includes information around offerings such as ages served, program enrollments, and program coverage. And I will also cover program implementation, which will include enrollment management strategies, funding models, and tuition costs for programs that have a tuition. So first, I'll go over program reach and offerings across the state. And for the 2024-2025 school year, there are 147 public school affiliated preschool programs in the state. Now, this represents a slight increase from our first year of data collection efforts, where we identified 144 schools. And there's minimal churn in these programs. So from the 2023 to 24 school year to 24-25, 3 programs closed, and there were 6 new programs that we identified. And programs existed in each county of the state. So this distribution of programs that you see on the map typically follows the population distribution of the state, with the highest number of programs operating in Hillsborough and Rockingham County, where many people in New Hampshire live. And most of these programs are located within elementary schools, but like I said before, a few of them do exist in high schools as part of a career and tech education program. And there are a few locations that operate at independent locations where they're only serving preschoolers. And out of the 147 programs, all of them serve 4-year-olds and 131 serve 3-year-olds. And in total, these programs enroll 5,471 children, which represented an 8% increase in prior years' recorded enrollment. And so, as I mentioned before, there are a few new programs identified in the study this year. And even if you withdraw those enrollments, there is still an increase in preschool enrollments from programs that we had in both years of data collection. And this 5,471 children represents about 1 in 5 of all 3- and 4-year-olds in the state. And in general, slightly more 4-year-olds are enrolled than 3-year-olds, but there is a small amount of children that we don't know the age for. So while this slide talks about the number of children enrolled in these programs, this next slide covers the percentages of programs with offerings. So few programs in this study that we capture in this study offer full day and full week in programming for their children. So for 4-year-olds, 17% of the programs offer full day enrollments options, while 34% offer full week, and then 15% offer full day and full week enrollment for 4-year-olds. So when I say full day and full week, that is also referring to typical school hours of operation, so Monday through Friday, and then your typical 8 to 3 window or so. So most of these programs don't offer enough coverage that align with a typical school schedule. And then also programming in summer months amongst these programs are limited, with just 14 programs for 4-year-olds and 10 for 3-year-olds offering summer programming. So next, I'm going to go over findings for program implementation. So this slide covers the enrollment management strategies that programs use, and our bar chart on the right here covers the percent of programs that use a lottery system, a waitlist, or any program enrollment management. And so what we're seeing is high rates of programs that use a waitlist. 81% of programs for 3-year-olds and 75% of programs for 4-year-olds use a waitlist for their enrollments, and with a sizable portion also using a lottery system, resulting in high overall usage of enrollment management strategies. 93% of programs for 3-year-olds and 85% of programs for 4-year-olds use enrollment management. So the presence of these waitlists and other strategies could indicate that these programs experience local demand, and showing that New Hampshire families are interested in participating in these public school affiliated preschool programs. And so something new we tried this year with our data collection efforts is trying to understand how these programs fund themselves. So this next slide shows the percent of public school affiliated preschool programs that use each kind of potential revenue source. So, and also to note that amongst the 147 preschool programs, we receive funding information from 127 programs. And so by far, the revenue source that was used most by these programs was tuition, with 91% of all programs utilizing tuition. But there are also many other revenue streams, such as Title I funding, which 49% of programs used, IDA Part B funding, which 45% of programs used, And then grants and local taxes were also funding streams used by different programs. And as you see, these percentages add up to more than 100, and that's because programs utilize more than one revenue source for their programs. Only 25% of programs utilized one funding stream. And then 31% of programs use two funding streams, and then a separate 31% use three funding streams, and 14% of programs have four or more funding sources. And since tuition is the highest revenue source used for these programs, I just wanted to touch on what these revenue rates are. And so 86 programs reported their tuition information to us for 4-year-olds, and 81 3-year-old programs gave their tuition information. And this chart shows the median tuition rates for public school affiliated preschool programs that gave us that information. And as you see, schools that have the full school day and full school week programming charge higher tuition amounts than programs that are part day and part week. So part day and part week programs, the median tuition for a 3-year-old is $158 a month and $183 a month for 4-year-olds, where full school day and full school week programs for 3 and 4-year-olds charge a median tuition of $450 a month. So while these rates seem low, it's important to remember that even if a program is full school day and full school week, this scheduling option may not align with working family schedules. And also to note with this graph, before I move on, some schools have multiple tuition rates. So maybe they have a cost for a 2-day-a-week program and a cost for a 4-day-a-week program. So some creative flexibility tuition options for families. And for this graph, we used the higher tuition rate that provided the greater amount of coverage. So some considerations too when thinking about the public school affiliated preschool programs. Most notably, our data cannot determine the extent of enrolled students with and without an IEP. So our survey doesn't ask student level questions. We prioritize asking broad questions about programs to get completed survey data from all schools. And while we know that some schools aim for 50% IEP enrollment, 50% non-IEP enrollment amongst their students, the exact ratios are unknown. But again, we don't want to ask student level questions to the schools. And so we just keep the questions broad, which doesn't allow the exact IEP breakdown to be known. And then, as I pointed out earlier, we have some unknown ages of students in these programs, and it very well could be that there are children under the age of 3 being served in these programs. So we are looking for our next year of data collection. We ask schools whether they serve children under the age of 3. And then also the exact within program revenue mix is unknown. So we learned in the last year of data collection that schools utilize multiple sources to fund these programs, but we don't know what percentage of program budgets are covered by each source of revenue. So very well could be possible that a school has 2 or 3 revenue sources, but they largely rely on, say, tuition or local tax income to cover program expenditures. But that breakdown is currently unknown. So some concluding thoughts about these preschool programs before we get into Q&A is that public school affiliated preschool programs can be an important part of the early education ecosystem, and that this type of arrangement could be beneficial to different types of New Hampshire families. For instance, these settings may offer smoother pathways into kindergarten, particularly for children with disabilities, by familiarizing families with schooling processes earlier. And for families in rural communities, public school-based options may be the best geographically suited offering. And then for families with preschool and grade school aged children, these preschool programs offered on site at public schools may simplify family scheduling and transportation logistics. And then also, since these programs are housed within school systems, they may have infrastructure advantages that support program sustainability. And then when thinking about these public school affiliated preschool programs, it's important to remember that they're one part of a larger complex ECE puzzle, and that systems for overseeing standards within these programs are currently piecemeal since they're not required by the state. And then without a dedicated federal or state revenue stream, these programs often have limited offerings. And it's rare for preschool programming within these schools to be available during the same time frame that elementary school children are in school. And that program dosage may be insufficient for meeting early learning needs or working family schedules. So if a program is only open 2 days a week for 4 hours a day, it can restrict what types of families can enroll their preschool age children into such a program. And so I also want to connect school affiliated preschool programs to the ECE supply landscape. And it's important that we have this conversation and that preschools are linked to the broader early learning ecosystem conversations, especially considering utilization rates of these programs are relatively high. As I mentioned earlier, about 1 in 5 preschool age children in the state are enrolled in these programs. But it's also important to note that the childcare programs also depend on enrollments of 3 and 4-year-olds for their operation. So as we see these public school affiliated preschool programs evolve within the state, it's important to track childcare program and school numbers and school affiliated preschool program locations to understand the ECE landscape. And so as I mentioned earlier, we're currently in our 3rd year of data collection for this preschool program project. And some next steps that we're taking is we're tracking location of preschool programs and the child care centers over time, again, to understand the relationship between the preschool program and the child care providers. And then we're also going to begin tracking private school affiliated preschool programs to understand their coverage and their role within the state ECE landscape. And we're expanding the survey this year and attempting to get 100% response rate from the private schools as we have for the public schools to further understand, again, how many students are being served within all different types of schools at the ages of 3 and 4. And that, again, as a reminder, our 2026 data collection is underway. So if you're connected to a school principal or assistant principal, please encourage them to complete this year's survey. I've been emailing many people around the state as we work to get 100% school participation in this survey once again this year. And so this work is just part of the New Hampshire Early Care and Education Research Consortium. So I just want to talk briefly about the consortium at large for those of you who are unfamiliar with us. So the New Hampshire Early Care and Education Research Consortium is a network of researchers and research users committed to strengthening the state's ECE landscape through data. The consortium is led here at the UNH Carsey School of Public Policy and is funded by the Couch Family Foundation and the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. And so what does that exactly mean? What do we do? Well, here at the consortium, we support the coordination of ECE research activity. We build and centralize New Hampshire ECE research, and we lend our expertise to the creation and use of strong data systems. So one thing we like to do is provide technical assistance to people throughout the state who have questions about state ECE or want to do a project but need data. So if you need data help, feel free to email me at tyrus.parker@unh.edu. I'm happy to talk childcare data and help you with whatever project you may have. And then I have 2 QR codes here on the screen. The one on the left is to sign up for updates from the consortium, which includes new research from our public school affiliated preschool programs. And then you can also apply to be a member of the consortium. We currently have over 30 members, and we're excited to include more of you who care about New Hampshire ECE research. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me about this project or data help in general. and then I'm happy to move over to Q&A.
Super. Thank you so much, Tyrus. Lots of questions in the chat and Q&A.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So folks, please feel free to write comments, questions in the chat. And I'm going to start with Christina, who asked a question during your presentation. Is there any data available on the increased number of children being referred? I am anecdotally hearing about more children referred for early supports, and I'm wondering if we're seeing the same trend here.
Okay, that's a wonderful question. That's something our survey unfortunately cannot cover, but that'd be a great line of thinking that I'd love to follow up with schools on or include in a future iteration of the survey. I currently can't connect to how students are enrolled in the program, but it is very possible that enrollments could be increasing in part because there's increased number of students who have an IEP and are referred into these programs. That is very much possible. I just don't know for certain.
Yeah, that would be tricky to find. Okay, Jennifer Kuna, and I apologize if I'm saying that incorrectly, has a few questions here. Excuse me. When you say offering, are these full day program offered to all children, or are these full day programs only for children with IEPs where it's determined necessary for free appropriate public education? I think you answered that, but can you walk us through that again?
Yeah, so when on our survey, when we ask questions about full day enrollment, it is for like all 3-year-olds or all 4-year-olds. So that would include the non-IEP questions. Thank you. That's a great question.
Great. And she goes on to ask, can you please clarify if the question you asked school districts about summer program was if it was available exclusively for children with IEPs or available for all children?
That would be for all children. We tried to keep it general level. So in part, it's so the schools don't have to answer, a 15-minute survey. We try to keep it brief for the schools. I know they're very busy over there. So it is, when we ask these questions, it's for all students.
Great. Thank you. And then Christina D'Alessandro has a question about transportation.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ask the school districts about transportation?
Yeah, thank you, Christina. That's a great question. That's an area we went back and forth on actually about including the survey, and we opted not to, again, just for brevity for the schools. But anecdotally, from my time looking into these programs, most of them do not provide transportation as well. So that could create barriers for certain types of families who want to who are interested in these programs. But in general, I don't want to speak for all the schools, but from what I've seen, I see more programs mention that they don't provide transportation. I rarely see programs that specifically mention that they do have it.
Interesting. Do you think that that's going to change in the near future?
I can't speculate. I would not think there's a reason for the trend to change, but I'm not certain.
Yeah,
it's an area I'd be really curious to learn more about with the schools for the transportation part.
Okay. Alexandra Amaral has a question. Does this data include Head Start programs that have agreements with SAUs to utilize classrooms? And I'm sorry, this area is out of my area of expertise, so I don't know what an SAU is.
SAU is like a school district, so
okay.
It does not include programs like that. These are programs that are housed and run by the schools.
Gotcha. Michael Gamel McCormick has a question. Is the IDEA funding Part B or Section 619?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I should have clarified. And that is Part B. we have specifically IDA Part B.
I actually had a question while you were presenting about the different types of funding, and you mentioned things like Title I and the IDEA Part B and so on. Could you explain a little bit more about that world for those of us who don't know much about those different funding sources?
Yeah, so IDA Part B is funding related to the children with IEPs.
And for those people who are not in the world of education, can you explain what an IEP is?
Yeah, so again, as I said, I always want to make sure I'm exact when talking about IEPs. It's an individual education program. So it can cover a range of different things, but it's students who might need help in a certain area, extra help in a certain area with their learning. And like I said, it has a range of outcomes, but it's a more personalized, custom education plan.
Yep, gotcha. What is Title
I? Yeah, so Title I funding. Again, sorry, I always like to be very exact. So sorry, it's for schools that have a higher concentration of low income students. So it's an additional funding stream for those types of schools.
Gotcha. Thank you. That's super helpful. Okay. Haley DeYoung is asking, could these slides be sent to us afterwards? Haley, the slides will actually be on the Carsey Policy Hour site along with the recording of this session. So, Jess, I will read her comment. Tyrus may have more to add, but at a high level, Jess is saying those kinds of programs would not be included. She's responding to Alexandra's question about Head Start programs. And as you know, those programs are captured in the child care licensing data, so they're not also tallied here. They're trying to avoid double counting available spaces. Would be curious to hear what you think about how to best describe those programs. Okay, thank you, Jess, for that. Okay, so Kelly from Reaching Higher has a question. Have you collected, analyzed, or synthesized data relative to the impact of these programs on success in kindergarten and beyond for both students with and without IEPs? Wow, awesome question.
Yeah, that is a wonderful question. Our data cannot directly address that, but there are other studies that I know of out there. I can't reference them off the top of my head, but when reading about preschool and its impact to children that participate, they tend to have they tend to benefit. There's higher kindergarten readiness rate, and I have heard anecdotally from some teachers around the state also that students that attend these preschool programs typically have higher kindergarten readiness rates.
Yeah, great, thanks. Drew has a question. How much were the other sources of funding per month per student so we can compare to the $450 tuition?
Totally. That's a wonderful question, Drew. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, I can't address that directly. We try to keep the survey as brief as we can to encourage completion from all the schools, and trying to ask about funding, especially per month per student for these other like funding streams. We were too worried it would be like a question that maybe people answering the survey didn't know the answer to, and would abandon the survey. So we only asked about tuition. We felt like that was a more ready, available number.
Yeah, makes sense. Great. Jane Van Bremen has a question. How many programs serve every 3 and 4-year-old in the district? I know a number of years ago, Bartlett, New Hampshire was doing this.
Yeah, that would be a great thing to look into, especially comparing like the 4-year-old enrollments to kindergarten enrollments to try to capture that. We haven't done that yet, but I do personally appreciate shouting out Bartlett. That's a school I attended growing up for several years. So, but I don't know how many programs are like Bartlett that enroll or have the ability to enroll every child in the district. Going by 1 in 5, 3 and 4-year-olds enrolled in these programs, I would estimate not many, but I can't know for certain.
Yeah, yeah. So going back to that 1 in 5 stat, so 1 in 5 3 to 4-year-olds in the state are going to the preschool. Do you know how that compares to other states?
It would vary significantly by state. The implementation of these programs differs tremendously across the states.
Mhm.
I know Maine just recently launched like 4-year-old preschool programming, but I don't know enrollment rates compared to New Hampshire. But it would just depend wildly based on the state laws and policies.
I imagine that's the case also with just the format in terms of offering full day versus
Right.
half day versus, 3 days a week and so on. So it varies tremendously across the United States in a lot of different ways. And in terms of funding, and you may not be able to answer this, I realize that this is totally outside of the scope of the research project, but do you get the sense that, or do you have any information that other states have the same sort of funding sources for their preschool education programs, or is New Hampshire a bit different?
I mean, it depends on how you want to look at it. Like, every state can get IDA Part B funding, every state can get Title I funding.
Yeah.
But the key differentiator with New Hampshire to potentially other states in this regard is there's not like dedicated state funding for these programs, whereas other states may have that, which
Right.
changes, what your potential coverage availability could be, or even offerings could be.
Absolutely. So then I have a question that you probably cannot answer. What are the chances that,
I can't comment on that. I'm not
yeah,
sure.
does it appear that I imagine that state funding would be absolutely critical to seeing an increase throughout the state, would you say?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of factors there. I'm interested once we complete data collection this year to see if there's another increase in enrollment. Um, I think the 8% increase year over year is pretty notable to me, but that does again factor in that there's some new programs in the midst. And I could see increase in the programs continuing, interest in the programs continuing to increase. But again, it's also dependent on like what a family needs, So if a program is only open a couple days a week for a half day, maybe that doesn't suit the needs of many families, or like I,
Right.
or maybe there's a parent who stays at home and they want to like ready their kids for kindergarten, so they have no interest in these programs. It can be totally dependent on the family and what their personal needs are.
Sure. Okay, we have a question from Ngozi. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing that. Thanks for this informative session. Do you also have child level early childhood development data indices?
Yeah, so for this project, we try not to collect child level information. Again, just trying to understand how these programs operate within the schools and how widespread they are. So I don't have from this study info on child development data or indices, no.
Yeah, and so that would kind of be an answer to the next question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. This is from Jennifer. Is there an opportunity as part of your study to ask families about their ability to access school district operated preschool programs?
Yeah, so again, in this study, we're contacting only the schools directly,
Yep.
but we are interested on our team in expanding how we understand these programs. And one potential pathway we have talked about is trying to find a way to talk to families to understand their interest and their understanding of these programs. How that looks, I don't know, but it's something we're interested in following up on. It feels like another part of like just understanding the whole process is to know what the families think.
Yeah, super. So lots of questions about, family specific or student level data. that are beyond the scope of this project. Can we talk about data gaps throughout the state? What are the data gaps that are most limiting our understanding of New Hampshire's preschool landscape right now? It sounds like you guys have your work cut out for you. There's a lot of information that people are looking to find. Can you talk just a little bit more about kind of the data landscape and where you see some gaps and what your team is hoping to look at in the future?
Yeah, definitely. So like childcare is complex. There's so many different ways to look at it and so much to understand how families interact in this space. And, families have many different needs, which just compounds it. There's so much you could possibly look at. And so there are a lot of gaps. I do really like this comment about programs connecting with childcare providers. That's something that's right now completely unknown at like at a level that we could discuss. I'm sure there's some instances of programs connecting with childcare providers for like to cover the second half of the school day or a work day and getting the kids high quality childcare. But there's a lot of unknowns because there's so many different permutations of this. So I don't know if there's something in particular you'd like me to follow up on, but
no, not necessarily. Looking at the chat here, there's great conversations happening here.
Mm-hmm.
Someone mentioned a good source, Michael, thank you, for state preschool programs is Rutgers and IEER State of Preschool Annual Yearbook. And he posted the link there. Thank you. So any concluding remarks, Tyrus, that we should take away?
Yeah, I mean, these preschool programs, New Hampshire's not really known for this, but they exist. We have 140 locations providing this compared to 260 locations providing kindergarten. There's interest. 1 in 5 3 and 4-year-olds in the state are enrolled in them. The coverage can be limited in these programs, but it's clear that New Hampshire families are interested in enrolling their children in these, and it's another piece of our complex ECE puzzle that we're trying to understand and provide what New Hampshire working families need the most and figure it out. This is just part of the equation I think goes underserved.
Absolutely. Good final thoughts. Okay, so if we don't have any other questions, then we're going to sign off here. Pardon the noise in the background. Everyone, thank you for joining, and thank you, Tyrus, for this very interesting and important conversation. Great presentation. And I should mention that this is our last Carsey Policy Hour of the season. We will be back in the fall for a Carsey Policy Hour with a new host. So stay tuned for that. And thank you all for joining us throughout this last academic year. We've had a lot of great conversations, and this one included. Tyrus, thanks for all the good work that you and your team are doing at Carsey and for an awesome presentation.